Okay, time for one last question. Trevor.
On one of the online communities, I read too many, I don't know which one. Someone's asking about a collaboration or a time you spent with Alan Moore, and he gave you a nickname.
Actually, the nickname, he didn't actually give me a nickname, but it is, if you actually want to see it all drawn, this story was actually drawn in sort of by Eddie Campbell, who is the finest living comic book artist and gentleman of Scottish descent, now living in Brisbane, Australia. And Eddie Campbell is a wonderful man. And Eddie put me and Alan in as characters in his Bacchus storybook, the name of which I've embarrassingly forgotten, but it's the one about the pub that declares itself a kingdom. And they have me in the background writing blurbs for things, which scared me away from writing blurbs for ages. And at one point, Eddie actually retells this story, so you can actually go and see it. But it had been a very long week. I got into England and had gone up to Northampton to see Alan. Alan Moore, in case none of you know him, is basically looks like a Yeti in a suit with nice boots. Huge, sort of somewhere up there, covered with hair. He looms at you like a vulture. Huge, looming. And now I'm a wuss. You wouldn't think it of me to read my fiction, but I really am. Terribly wussy. Especially where I can use my imagination. So I tend not to be much of a wuss when I can actually see things written down, or even see things. But when I'm imagining them and putting them together in my head, I can be a real wuss. So we're sitting over dinner. And Alan is, as you would normally do, you know, over dinner, describing the bit from hell he's just written, which is a murder. And he's gone through the throat slitting all right, and he's the evisceration, and Dr. William Gull is, you know, and then he says, oh, look over there, and as she turns, you know, he cuts her throat from ear to ear, and he stabs down. I've given Eddie instructions that I need him to, you know, you see the rib cage at this point. And, you know, we're getting a few minutes of this, and I'm doing all right, and then he says, and then he reaches in, and he pulls out her lungs, one by one, he holds them up, and he says, look, Netley, lights. And at that point, I realised that what I really needed was fresh air. And I said to Alan, excuse me, I'm going to go outside and sit down for a minute. And as I get up to walk away, I hear a voice from behind me going, well, 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 that was Neil, Mr. Scary Trousers Gaiman, author of Sandman, on his way out to sit down. And the weird thing about that is I then went and sat down and had one of those sort of weird incidents that tend to happen to me, and that Alan thought was rather peculiar when he came out and encountered. And I turned it into not one but two separate pieces of fiction because it was so magnificently unlikely. As an elderly gypsy lady came up to me under the impression that I was homeless. And sitting outside on the pavement, obviously I was homeless, and she sat down to cheer me up and told me her life story. How she used to be a dancer. And I put a little bit of her in Sandman, a little bit of her in Neverwhere. And then Alan came out later and, you know, saw me say goodbye to this strange, mad old gypsy, and she went down the road, and he said, hey, was that Mad Hattie? And I said, not exactly. So there you go. More true weird stories from the Neil Gaiman camp.